Good evening, sir.
All right. So once again, good evening. Now, let me welcome all of you to the classes of the art and culture. And this part of this section of art and culture is going to be highly relevant for all of you. In fact, especially in the context of understanding its importance from both prelims and the mains point of views. Uh, See, if you have gone through the question papers, then definitely you would be having some fair idea about it, that how this segment of art and culture stands important or rather has importance for all of you. Uh, if I have to take a few of the examples to actually substantiate my point, if you see 2021 mains question paper, now there were six questions which were from the history and culture part in GS paper 1. And out of those six questions in the mains, four were directly asked from the art and culture part. And even in the prelims, in 2020 prelims, there were 8 to 9 questions directly asked from the art and culture part. And I'm talking about the last prelims which was conducted by UPSC, in fact. Now, thereby, the logic says that if this particular segment, art and culture, is not so, I would say, improved or not done properly, then there will be a trouble for many of you to not only clear the prelims but also to have good marks in your mains examination, that is in GS paper 1. Now, the point is that if you see the questions of art and culture of, I would say, last 7 years, in fact, right from 2013 onwards, the kind of questions which UPSC have asked or has rather has asked would give us enough of understanding that what kind of questions are important in art and culture, because again the issue is that art and culture is very holistic subject. It's a very vast area, in fact. Why vast area? If someone understands, let's say, only a segment of music, so there are a lot of things that are supposed to be learned in music. Now similarly, if someone is fond of, let's say, dancing, so similarly there are a lot of things which are supposed to be learned in dancing. So my point is that of course the kind of wordings that is there in the syllabus, it makes the task of a candidate quite tough in terms of preparing the entire art and culture segment. So therefore, the best way to prepare art and culture would always be to at least go through the very basic textbooks and all those contents of those basic textbooks which are available in the public domain very easily. And second, to go through the question papers of UPSC so that we can have a fair idea about that what all domain and dimensions are important as far as art and culture segment is concerned. Otherwise, it is just like a sea. And if you don't know about your limitation, that how far can you swim in the sea, you will be definitely going to flunk, or you're definitely going to be drawn in the sea. So that is precisely my point, that I wanted to make you understand before entering to art and culture, to first of all delimit our domain of doing the art and culture. Otherwise, there's no limitation to do the art and culture segment. All right, you can't bind art and culture within, let's say, 5 or 6 or 7 topics. That is a I mean, moot question and moot query, moot actually, I would say, observation from my side. Coming back to this issue, that what is the syllabus then, and how do we, I mean, classify the segments of art and culture, and what would be our criteria to categorize the segments of art and culture? Let us just try to understand that aspect. See, as far as the yeah, so as far as the art and culture segment is concerned, uh, there are various wordings that is there in the syllabus of UPSC. For example, the first wording I would like to share with all of you, the green screen. Now see, let me make it shareable to all of you first. Okay, fine. So are you able to see this whiteboard?
Yes, sir.
Fine. Now see here, the idea is, just a minute. In art and culture, the syllabus that what UPSC has mentioned, it mentions very clearly that you are supposed to cover Indian heritage and culture part. So Indian heritage culture part includes the Indian culture such as art forms, second, literature, and the third, architecture, that too from from ancient to modern times. Now see, exactly this is the word, or these are the words, in fact. These are the words mentioned there in your syllabus. So when we say art and culture, we should be always be very clear that what all things are we supposed to study in this art and culture. So in art and culture, first of all, we will have to study about the significance of the wording called Indian heritage and culture. And then it also talks about that Indian culture includes the three important segments. That is, one is art forms, second is literature, and third is architecture. Fine. Now these are three very important words mentioned in the syllabus. And then they mention, or rather they ask you to prepare these all three forms, or these all three aspects of Indian culture from ancient time to modern times. So by this logic, it makes us very clear that we are supposed to prepare the entire aspects of any particular issue of art form or literature, whatever, right from the ancient time to the recent time. That is a modern time, basically. All right, because modern time again would be a part of even the entire freedom struggle of India, and even after that, in fact. All right. So that all will become a part of modern times only. So therefore, there is no any, I would say, the limitation in terms of asking you a question on these all dimensions. That is the significance of giving you such kind of syllabus by UPSC. Fine. So here the point that we would have to highlight here, and that is what all things are we supposed to cover in these all art forms. Now see, since art form is a very ambiguous term. Why? Because see, what do you mean by art? Art is anything that you express or that a human being express their cognitive power, their thinking power in any particular medium, through any particular medium, that is basically the art. All right, whether it is, let's say, dancing, also it's a art. Let's say music, yes, it's a art. All right, let's say painting, yes, it's a art. Fine. So anything that a human being express about the mental cognitive you can say status, about the surrounding, about the, let's say, the society, about anything that a human being wants to express to others through any medium, that will be called as an art form. So therefore, even the, let's say, making certain goods or certain items in a way, in a creative manner, could also be an art form. All right. So any creative, you can say, outcome by a human being can also be clubbed into the concept of art form. Fine. That is what art form has given a wider dimension for UPSC to ask you any question. Fine. And then they can justify it's an art form. So hence a question is logical to all of you. Fine. So that's the reason why here we have to understand what kind of art form are we talking about. So art form could be another classification could be of art form, that would be, let's say, there would be a performing art. All right. So there could be a performing art. There could be, let's say, visual art. So visual art, performing art, that could be another, you can say, sub classification of the art form. Fine. So whatever you create which is visible to others, let's say, even your printing, that is also a visual art. All right. And on the other hand, what you perform in front of others could be singing, could be dancing. All right. So these all are the performing arts. So singing, dancing are the performing arts. Visual arts could be, let's say, painting, sculpture. All right. Iconography. So see, I mean, these all are the visual art also. Fine. So therefore, you can now understand that again, there's a, I mean, big dimension that it has been added to this particular concept of art form. So in nutshell, we have to cover a lot of things in the art form, then literature, and then followed by even architecture. So let us first of all start today with the basic understanding of what is art, what is culture, what is heritage. These basic aspects, basic nuances of art and culture needs to be also clarified first. Fine. Let us start with that particular aspect. So, starting with what is culture and what is heritage, let us just try to understand that aspect. See, what is culture? Culture, in nutshell, is defined as a way of life. Whatever we do, whatever we eat, whatever we wear, whatever we speak, whatever we behave. Now, everything that is associated with the human behavior, the human cognition, that is thinking. All right. So anything that is shown in their behavior in human being, that is understood in humans understanding or humans thinking also, that is actually called as culture. So culture is the summation of, it is the summation of the cognitive, behavioral, and affectionate aspect of cognitive, behavioral, and affectionate aspect of the human beings. It's a summation of the group of activities pertaining to the cognitive, behavioral, affectionate aspect of human being. That is basically culture. Fine. So therefore, culture is classified as tangible and intangible items. Culture is also classified as tangible and intangible items. The tangible items are those items which are visible, which can be perceived through your sense organ easily. So of course, those are the tangible items which you can see, feel, and of course, you can touch, feel, perceive. Now that is the tangible items. The intangible items are basically the ideas, the informations, the knowledge, all right, the thinking process. Now that is basically the culture intangible aspect. Culture is a word has been derived from the word called cult, C-U-L-T, cult. Cult is a Latin word. It's a Latin word which means tilling or cultivating, which means tilling or cultivating. Therefore, therefore, whatever the human society or human beings have developed with the passage of time, a set pattern of activities. So, with the passage of time, a set pattern of activities have become a part of culture. Therefore, it is called as a way of life. Therefore, it is called as a way of life. For example, the tribals love to live in the forest area. The tribals love to live in the forest area with all comfort without having any fear from the wild animals. But contrary, on the contrary, the other non-tribal population have all the fear with the wild and even the other natural elements in a forest area. So it is all due to the tribal culture. They have been nurtured in that particular culture only, so therefore they are comfortable in that area, unlike the others. So that's again goes for the tribals also. The tribals are also forcefully brought into the urban space. So in the urban landscape, they don't feel very comfortable in that way. So that is how you need to understand that since it's a set pattern of their behavior, set pattern of their activities, and they have learned it. They have learned it. Therefore, culture is a learned behavior. Culture is a learned behavior. It varies from place to place. All right. So culture is a learned behavior. It varies from place to place. For example, Occidental culture, Orientalist culture. The Occidental culture is basically the Western culture. Oriental culture is basically the Asian culture or Eastern world culture. So this is how you see culture also varies. Culture of India is something else. The culture of America is something else. Fine. So these are the few things that we have to keep in our mind, that culture is a learned behavior. And since it's a learned behavior, therefore it is also liable to change. Because something that you learn can also be unlearned, can also be relearned. All right. Something that you learn can also be unlearned, can also be relearned. So learning is basically an ability to bring a change in your behavior. That is what is learning is defined as. So idea is culture is liable to change because it is a learned behavior. And the most interesting fact about culture is it is humans who shape culture, and at times it is culture also which shape human beings. So the idea is, who made God? Whether the human beings made God or God made human beings. So the same question goes with the logic of culture. So who made culture? I mean, culture is made by the humans, or other humans have made the culture, or in fact, culture has shaped the human beings. Fine. So the idea is very simple, that humans also shape culture, and similarly, culture also shape human beings. Fine. So at many occasions, we as a human have shaped our culture. For example, it's a sati pratha. Now, when sati pratha was being practiced in India, that was a part of Indian culture. That was a part of Indian culture, and there were many people out there at that point of time who opposed the abolition of sati in India, isn't it? So, idea is that was the time when this was a culture, but this culture had to change with the elements of rationality, elements of modernity, elements of reasons. Culture can also get changed. All right. And if you have seen a movie called Twilight, Ek Prem Katha, so very nicely there was a dialogue communicated to the protagonist by one of the actors, that you are fighting against culture of having no toilets in the house. So a fight against culture is not a simple fight, because you have to fight against the entire society. The same thing was done by Raja Ram Mohan Roy when he fought, or he stood against the practice of sati. So even his mother boycotted Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Now that was the story of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. So this is how you see the culture. So what I'm trying to explain to you, that what is culture? Culture is something that is liable to change. But on the contrary to culture, heritage does not change. Culture is liable to change, but our heritage does not change. Now the point is, then what is heritage? Why does not it change? See, let me tell you, heritage is all those aspects and the values of culture which have been transmitted from one generation to another generation to the human beings. What is heritage? It is, or it encompasses all the aspects and values of culture transmitted to human beings. It encompasses all those aspects or values of culture transmitted to human beings by their ancestors it is, or it encompasses all those aspects or values of culture transmitted to human beings by their ancestors from generation to generation, from generation to generation. All right. For example, architecture, monuments, even scientific inventions, philosophies, intellectual achievements, such as Vedas, yogas. Now, these are the heritage. These are the heritage that we have to also protect. So, heritage is something that is not liable to change, but culture is something that is liable to change. So, the point is, heritage is that part of culture. Heritage is that part of culture which does not change. It is transmitted from one generation to another. It is transmitted from one generation to another by our ancestors. Therefore, it becomes duty, a moral duty upon the inheritors to protect the cultural heritage of our country. Because heritage is also classified into natural and cultural. We have natural heritage like forest, mountains, rivers, and we have cultural heritage like the man-made instruments and objects before us, whether it is the context of thinking, philosophy, ideas, scientific inventions, all right, technique of Vedas, technique of, in fact, yogas, etc. This is all actually a part of our heritage. So my point is that this question was asked. This question was asked, and I now will explain. And in fact, I will reiterate the question that was asked by UPSC, and I would like to have your response on this particular question. Now, reading the question, you can simply try to understand what was the demand of this question. Question was, safeguarding the Indian art heritage is the need of the moment. Safeguarding the Indian art heritage is the need of the moment. Safeguarding the Indian art heritage is the need of the moment. Comment. Comment. So safeguarding the Indian art heritage is the need of the moment. Comment. Now this was a question asked in 2018 mains examination in 150 words. Fine. So what would be your response on this question? So give me any, any understanding that you have developed or any fact that you want to share.
Sir, I would start the introduction by defining heritage.
Mm-hmm.
In the main body, I would write the various types of heritage that India has, as you have mentioned, the intellectual and the philosophical.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would mention the steps taken by government, such as Archaeological Survey of India.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's an agency called INTAC.
Okay.
सो उसके बारे में थोड़ा सा एंड फिर कंक्लूजन में यही कि it is morally incumbent upon us to safeguard our heritage. And फिर थोड़ा सा इंडिया का सॉफ्ट पावर के बारे में भी लिख देता हूँ.
That's good. Good point. Okay. Anyone else?
सर इसमें हम ऐड कर सकते हैं द
हाँ.
रीजंस टू सेव, जैसे फॉर टूरिज्म टू लेट आवर फ्यूचर
हाँ.
जनरेशन नो अबाउट की हेरिटेज व्हाट वाज आवर पास्ट अबाउट इट, सो दैट कैन बी एडेड फॉर द आंसर लाइक.
ठीक है, ये भी एक इम्पोर्टेंट ऑब्जर्वेशन हो सकता है कि हाउ इट कैन आल्सो कंट्रीब्यूट इन द प्रमोशन ऑफ आवर let's say tourism and other sectors as well if you protect it or if you support it. ठीक है, और कुछ?
So we can quote various examples of dyeing art forms, like there is Rogan art from Kutch in Gujarat, which is practiced by very few people now. So we and say for instance other art forms which are ignored, for example Madhubani painting. So it was on a stage of dyeing and it was recent, matlab thode time pehle it was revived. So we can quote these examples and begin our answer and then elaborate on other points.
ठीक है, I mean you can also start with those few of the examples that you can quote, especially where you have the reasons to support the argument that yes, we need to protect or rather support this dying art heritage of India. And as you have understood the meaning of art heritage or the heritage is something that we have got it from our ancestors, and it has become now a moral duty upon or incumbent upon all of us to actually protect and safeguard the art heritage of our country. All right. So therefore, that Nishant has said that we have certain organizations also which are working for safeguarding our art heritage, like INTAC is one. Then also you have UNESCO. All right. So UNESCO is equally there. That is the international funding is done through UNESCO of your cultural heritage sites. Fine. There are many cultural heritage sites also from India. So those examples you could write in the answer very easily. Fine. And then of course you have to also explain the idea that why is it necessary to actually protect it. Fine. So yes, GI tax could also be mentioned here. Fine. So if you protect your art and the cultural heritage, even GI tax can also give you some advantage. So why is it necessary to protect it? Because the idea is that, see, first and the foremost, that there is less sensitivity among people regarding the protection and safeguarding our art heritage in this country. That's one very important aspect. Second, that due to the climatic conditions also, there has been a regular attack upon the art heritage of India. For example, it's a Taj Mahal. Now, Taj Mahal is a well-known example for all of us. It is actually an art heritage of India, a culture heritage of India, but it has been facing a very serious crisis in the last few decades due to the acidic rain. All right. So the white marble has started getting the yellowish color or a brownish color in that way. So that is something again we are facing a sort of a crisis here, isn't it? So climatic factors are also responsible in terms of depleting our art heritage aspect. Then thirdly, we have to also explain that due to the you can say disturbance in law and order also at times. Disturbance in law and order also, there has been also an attack on our art heritage. And this is an example you can cite in the context of Red Fort. All right, so Red Fort was damaged. If you know about it, probably you may be knowing about it, that many of the, of course, aspects of Red Fort was damaged in recent protest. So even the law and order factor has also been a threat upon the art and heritage. Fine, and that's third important point. Fourth is, of course, lack of protection also. That the ASI, that is Archaeological Survey of India, that is responsible in India to actually protect all those heritage monuments or heritage centers of our country. Especially, I'm talking about the cultural heritage. On the other hand, we have the Geological Survey of India, GSI, that is supposed to protect our the natural you can say resources, natural heritage. In fact, in that way, fine. So we have the institutions also in our country, but these institutions are having limited capacity, limited manpower, limited capacity, and the most important, limited finance to actually safeguard our art and heritage or art heritage in our country. All right, and finance is the most important aspect. You have to keep this thing in mind that finance is the most important aspect to protect art heritage. There are many monuments inside Delhi also which has not been protected. They have been the sites of art heritage. but they have not been protected nicely, and therefore today they are almost at a dying stage. They're almost at a dying stage. All right. So we receive fundings, of course, under UNESCO funding processes, but that is limited to only those sites which have been recognized by UNESCO. UNESCO does not recognize every historical site of India as a, let's say, the World Heritage, in fact. All right. So that is precisely what we have to argue, that of course UNESCO funding is limited to only those sites which have been recognized as the World Heritage sites. On the other hand, India is rich enough. India is extremely rich enough in terms of having a plethora of art heritage sites in this country because of its vast and rich history. All right. So obviously here the financial aspect is the most important limitation for the government to actually look after the entire art heritage sites in India. In the background of that only, the recent government has come out with a proposal of public-private partnership, PPP model, है ना? तो लोगों ने बीच में हल्ला किया कि इसको ये बेच दिया, उसको यहाँ बेच दिया, रेड फोर्ट को उसको बेच दिया, ताजमहल को उसको बेच दिया. But the idea is that, of course, Red Fort, Taj Mahal are the World Heritage sites, so they have been receiving the fundings. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, that fundings have not been sufficient enough to maintain those big monuments, especially under the recent, you can say, challenges like climatic conditions and the challenges of climatic conditions. So the government needs enough of money to also support this all art heritage, and therefore the model of PPP has been adopted, that is public-private partnership has been adopted recently by the government to support this concept of course, art heritage. All right. So this is how you have to give your argument in terms of commenting upon this particular question, which was supposed to be written in only 150 words. Fine. So first of all, you will come out with the challenges of art and heritage. These are the 5-6 challenges. Then you'll come out with the solutions. And solutions, there you come out with the solutions which have already been taken and solutions which are supposed to be taken. All right. So in solutions, you will come out with the solutions that has already been taken by the government, like the institutional steps. We have the institutions to look after these monuments or look after these art and heritage sites. You'll mention about that. Fine. And then you will also come out with the kind of suggestions that you can also bring into your answer. So of course, PPP can be one of these suggestions. And here in PPP, you can also include not only public-private partnership, but rather public-private people's partnership. Because even after having public-private partnership, there's no guarantee of generating the sensitiveness among the people to protect our art heritage. So therefore, it is incumbent upon the government to also elicit the support of the local self-governments, Panchayati Raj, municipalities, and their committees to be involved in the protection of all the art heritage sites. Therefore, it will become PPP model, 4 times P model, not only PPP model. So 4 times P model, we would be able to protect and safeguard our art heritage. All right. So that is the way to improve it. And of course, one of the suggestions you can also include that even inclusion of this particular syllabus in UPSC is another good way to, of course, increase the sensitivity towards art heritage of India. ठीक है, पहले तो सिलेबस में था भी नहीं, लोग पढ़ लेते थे कि क्वेश्चन आ जाता था, तो इसलिए अब तो सिलेबस में मेंशन है साफ साफ. तो ये भी एक अच्छा तरीका है कि ऐसे इश्यूज के ऊपर सेंसिटिविटी इंडिया में बढ़ाने के पीछे. इनफैक्ट, so even in the school curriculum, the syllabus of art and culture has become a part. It's another way to increase the sensitivity among the students, among the school students, regarding the protection and safeguarding the art heritage sites of India. This is how you will argue in your answer. Okay. So first of all, write the challenges. Of course, writing the introduction, the way you understood the concept of heritage. Then write those challenges, write the solutions, and then the solutions to classify solutions which have already been taken, solutions which are supposed to be taken. Fine. That is how you will comment upon this particular issue. Fine. And one or two points you can add as advantage, and if you protect it, what are the advantages for your country? So it advantages, especially in the cultural sense, social sense, economic sense, and also political sense. Political sense, why? Because the government stature also improves globally. All right. So this is what are the advantages of doing this. So this is how you will classify your answer. Okay. So see, this question has already been asked in 2018. Now coming to this particular issue of culture only. So then what is culture and how do we differentiate culture with civilization? See, first of all, let us again recollect what was culture, what is in fact culture. See, culture, I just told you, it's a learned and acquired behavior. It's a learned and acquired trait in a human being, in fact. It is shared by a group of people and it is transferred from one generation to another generation. Culture changes, hence it's a dynamic concept. Culture is a dynamic concept because it changes. Culture varies from place to place, hence it is also a diverse concept. At the same time, culture allows the permissible behavior to human beings. Permissible behavior to the human beings, or what are the ideal behavior of a human being in a society? What are the ideal behaviors of a human being in a given society, a societal setup? For example, when you when you sit in the class, when your teacher enters inside the class, you all must have got stood up and must have wished the teacher good morning or whatever, good afternoon, like this way. And that what actually has been a culture of a school, culture of any education institution also in that way. So the idea is this is something that we have also acquired through our society. When you go to a temple, you try to keep your mobile switched off, and even if the mobile rings up, you try not to pick up the call inside the garbhagriha where the worshipping or offerings are being done. You come out and then you receive a call if it is so urgent. That is a culture, in fact. All right. So see, this is how culture also guides a human being to have an ideal pattern of behavior. Fine. And at the same time, culture is also known for the continuity and change. That many of the traits of culture continue, and many of those traits change with the change of time. All right. Many of those traits also change with the change of time. There are various factors which influence culture. Various factors that influence culture, such as westernization or modernization, then the emergent national culture, and even the popular culture. Even the popular culture. Now, what are these three aspects? Let's understand that. See, I told you just now that culture gets influenced by three factors, in fact. One is the westernization or modernization. However, these two terms are different, but both of them can influence the culture. Then we have the emergent national culture, And the third one is also the popular culture. So these three aspects influences one's culture, in fact. Now, what is this westernization? It is simply imbibing the Western ideas, Western behavior, Western values. Now, that is simply westernization. For example, you need to understand it that in today's parlance, you go to any village of India, now there is a spree of providing their children English education. There's a spree of providing their children English education. The English education is something that is now being viewed by even the villagers. It is compulsory for them. Even not only today, I mean, it was also at the time of India's independence or India's freedom struggle. So that was purely a westernization concept in that way. But it also influences your culture. All right, there's no doubt about it. Then even modernization. Modernization is something that is not only westernization, rather it is the rational ideas, values, behaviors to be adopted in one's culture. All right. So, for example, when Raja Ram Mohan Roy challenged Sati Pratha or Sati system, he was not actually talking about westernization, rather he was pushing forward the issue of modernization. Because in any circumstance, there was no any rationality of Sati system in India. It was completely devoid of any reasons, any rationality, any justification. So therefore, this practice has to change, and this was changed later on, in fact. So gradually, Indian culture of Sati Pratha got changed. That is the modernization aspect. Then emergent national culture. Emergent national culture, you can understand simply by the example of the culture that was prevailing in India at the time of India's freedom struggle. The time of India's freedom struggle, what kind of culture was there in India? Everyone wanted to wear khadi clothes because it was promoted by Mahatma Gandhi. Everyone wanted to wear Gandhi cap because it was being worn by Mahatma Gandhi. All right, are you getting point? Now, similarly, you can see, I mean, this is how the emergent national culture also influenced the existing culture of India at a particular point of time. Similarly, you can see in the current context also. Now, what is the current emergent national culture? The current emergent national culture is that everyone wants to talk about, let's say, the nationalism, in fact. All right. So everyone wants to be shown as a pure nationalist in India. So nationalism has overshadowed every other thing in India right now. All right, because no one is bothering about what is going on in economy, what is happening in the society, what is happening in our culture. They all are bothering only about that we have to be now highly nationalist. All right, that is the emergent national culture today, in fact. Fine. So this is how it is also influencing Indian culture, in fact. Because this nationalism, if it becomes extreme, it also goes towards chauvinism. And chauvinism is slightly dangerous because from here you don't even understand the importance of the cultural harmony. All right. So that is one aspect of understanding the emerging national culture that is currently there. Now, what is then popular culture? See, popular culture is a culture that is given to us by mass media. So mass media promotes popular culture. So whether print or visual media, both forms of media, they play a very instrumental role in promoting the popular culture. Fine. And of course, you can understand from various aspects like what is being shown in media, what is being depicted in media, what is being pushed up by media, that becomes a part of our culture. All right. So whether you see the example in the form of a song, let's say pop songs, rap songs. So these songs have become popular. Why? Because it was supported by mass media. So this is how it has become a part of our culture. So this is how the culture gets influenced by all the three important factors. And India also, it has been same in various stages of life, various stage of Indian evolution, in fact. All right. That is what actually was the point. Now, the one important point again I would like to reiterate here, and that is that there is always an element of continuity and change in the culture. Now, what was ancient Indian culture did not remain same in the medieval Indian culture. What was there in medieval Indian culture did not remain same even in the modern Indian culture. But there were certain features which continued in every phases of Indian history. There were changes, but at the same time, there was also continuity of the features of culture of India. So therefore, culture keeps on changing, but not completely. But not completely. It gets transmitted in some of the other form from one culture to other culture. From one culture to other culture. Fine. Now, what is this issue? And let me tell you why this issue is important, because a question has already been asked by UPSC on this issue. And now I'm reiterating, or rather reading that particular question before all of you. Now you listen to this question very patiently. This question, according to me, was the best question asked in last 10 years by UPSC in GS paper. The best, number one. I would rate this question one question in last 10 years asked by UPSC. And the question is that I'm reiterating, repeating this question. Let me tell you the question, in fact. Just a moment. Yes, the question was asked in the year 2015 mains examination. And this question was the ancient civilization. I'm writing it down so that you can write it down. This question is, according to me, the best one ever asked by UPSC in last 10 years, in fact, in GS paper. You can see on your green screen writing it down. The ancient civilization in Indian subcontinent differed from those of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece, in that its culture and traditions have been preserved without a breakdown to the present day comment in 200 words. Now you see on your screen, this was the question asked in 2015 mains examination. by UPSC. Now, the question is, the ancient civilization in Indian subcontinent differed from those of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece in that its culture, कहाँ difference था? Difference था culture में, in that its culture and traditions have been preserved without a breakdown to the present day. Comment. So what is it is saying? It is from the topic that we have just discussed, that is continuity and change. And this question is demanding two things. One, that you have a fair idea that why the ancient civilization of the Indian subcontinent continued in its culture and traditions without a breakdown even to the present day. That is one aspect of this question. Second aspect says, on the contrary, the civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece could not continue, could not carry forward their culture and traditions without a breakdown to the present day. Why? I mean, see, that's the reason why I told you this is the best question I have found in last 10 years asked by UPSC in GS paper. Why? Because this question is in fact, it is basically the nerve of India that actually has been asked. Now see, how do you understand this question? Anyone would like to say something?
Sir, I read about this, like, for instance, when India ka culture has been, one of the reasons why Indian culture has been preserved for so long is that when the Mughal invasion happened, so the Satavahanas and Rajputs played a key role in fighting off and preventing the cultural invasion to penetrate deeper in the Indian subcontinent. Maybe that could be one reason why Indian culture got preserved for a relatively longer period of time. Whereas when we compare Greece, so the Emperor Constantine, he was converted on his deathbed to Christianity, and then Christianity, Roman Catholic Church spread in the entire country. So maybe religion can be one of the important features why Indian civilization has continued for so long.
I would like to correct one thing here, that contemporary to Mughals, Satavahanas were not there.
Oh,
Because
sorry.
only Rajputs were there. All right, and the rest, of course, your analysis was correct to the certain extent. In fact, all right, so that is good. Anyone else who would like to say something on this?
Sir, the three civilizations mentioned, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece, they are at closer proximity to Judea, Israel. So that is where the monotheism took place from Jesus, Moses, and Muhammad. So these were eventually converted into Abrahamic religions. Indian civilization is far away. So एक तो invasion काफी late हुआ वहाँ पे. Islam came to India. It came to Sindh earlier, I think 700 or 800, but to reach hinterland India. However, Islam has been present in India, but वो mix होता रहा, and it was subsequently absorbed without vaporizing the original culture. और फिर सर एक कंक्लूजन में दे देता सनातन धर्म का बोल के.
हाँ, ठीक है, गुड. और कोई? Anyone else?
Sir, can we say that कि irrespective of, अगर जैसे हम बुद्धिज्म या जैनिज्म की बात करते हैं, मतलब अगर गुप्तास भी आए थे तो उन्होंने ऐसा नहीं था कि पेट्रनेज नहीं दिया था टू दैट, बिकॉज पॉपुलेशन काफी फॉलो करी थी वो रिलीजन को, तो वो लोग उसको भी मतलब बेसिकली दे वर ट्राइंग टू गो विद एवरीथिंग, तो उसकी वजह से कहीं ना कहीं हमारा वो प्रोटेक्ट होते गया हमारा जो कल्चर है, एंड सो इट डिडंट एंड इजीली, एंड compared to the contemporary, वहाँ पे it was not like that. They were all trying to go with their culture first and उसको ज़्यादा वो prevail कराने की कोशिश कर रहे थे.
Okay, ठीक है, point है इसमें भी. कि स्टेट सपोर्टेड था ये पॉलिसी। ऑलराइट, और कोई? अमृतांशु?
सर जहाँ तक सर हम समझ पा रहे हैं, क्वेश्चन में सर रीजन तो पूछा नहीं है सर। लेकिन सर इसमें अगर मेरे को लिखना होता तो सर हम ये बताते कि क्या क्या एस्पेक्ट में, क्योंकि इजिप्ट में जैसे पिरामिड बनता है तो अभी नहीं बनता है, लेकिन कुछ कुछ एस्पेक्ट में जैसे कि आर्ट में अगर आप देखिए तो भरतनाट्यम, कुचिपुड़ी भी हम लोग करते हैं, है ना। फिर स्कल्पचर में भी जैसे कौन सा शहर है यूपी का, वो बुलंदशहर, वहाँ का सेरामिक्स अभी भी कंटिन्यू करता है। फिर रिलीजियस प्रैक्टिस में भी जितना रिलीजन आते गया वो हिंदुस्तान में एक तरह से मेल्टिंग पोट टाइप समाते गया। और मैरिज का भी जैसे आप अगर बाकी सोशल एस्पेक्ट में भी देखेंगे तो कंटिन्यू हो ही रहा है, जैसे जैसे नियम बना हुआ था, जैसे पैट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी था हमारा। और इतना सर क्योंकि बाकी इजिप्ट और मेसोपोटामिया और ग्रीस का सिविलाइजेशन कैसा था वो मेरे को पता नहीं है। आते चलते हैं कि क्या क्या इसमें इंडियन सोसाइटी में क्या क्या हमको दिखता है जो एंशिएंट सिविलाइजेशन चलता आ रहा है। जैसे हड़प्पा का भी ब्यूरियल प्रैक्टिस वगैरह अभी भी कंटिन्यू किया जाता है हरियाणा वगैरह। हाँ बस 2 वर्ड हो जाता।
अच्छा, ठीक ठीक। Vatsala, you want to say something on this? I hope Vatsala, you are.
Sir, I don't have any idea about it.
You don't have any idea about
It's a new concept. I don't have any idea about it.
it. Now you will be having fair idea about it now. Okay, just try to listen here. Let's say there are a couple of catchwords that you have to keep in your mind when you are answering this particular question. One is that it is talking about ancient civilization in Indian subcontinent. So which civilizations do you find they were ancient civilizations in Indian subcontinent primarily, in fact? So obviously the very first one was the Indus Valley civilization, or so-called Harappan civilization, isn't it? So from there only you have to trace this issue. Fine. And then of course afterwards the civilization actually got broken down into different cultures, and we don't say it was Vedic civilization. Why? Can anyone tell me why do we not use the word called Vedic civilization, but on the contrary we use the word called Indus Valley civilization? What we say Vedic culture, but not civilization.
Sir, because India was also home to schools of various schools of philosophy that did not believe in the Vedas, such as Buddhism, Charvak, and Jainism, and Rajivikas as well, I guess.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone who would like to comment upon it? कि क्यों हम वैदिक पीरियड को सिविलाइजेशन नहीं कहते हैं, बट हम हड़प्पा को सिविलाइजेशन जरूर कहते हैं?
So Vedas were also written over a period of time, so maybe that could also be one of the reasons.
That's a correct explanation to a certain extent again. और कोई कुछ कहना चाहता है? Now you say Vedic people were illiterate. All right. So people who were there in the Vedic phase, they were basically illiterate. In very clear-cut manner, they didn't have the art of writing. They didn't have knowledge of writing. So that was precisely the issue in the Vedic period. Secondly, in the Vedic period, the Vedic age was limited to only a small area, unlike what was there in the Indus Valley civilization. Indus Valley civilization was spread from the area of Afghanistan to entire Pakistan, to the border of Pakistan and Iran, to the extent of Damabad in Maharashtra, Alamgirpur in UP, all right, Manda in Jammu and Kashmir. So that was the expansion of the Vedic civilization. Fine. And this particular big area was having a common trait, common culture. Therefore, we say it was a part of same civilization. All right, common culture, common traits. The kind of, you can say, the urban pattern was there. All right, the kind of the bricks were used by them, the kind of artifacts were used by them. They were common, in fact. And because of this factor only, it was basically a big area under a centralized or maybe decentralized, whatever, under a command of certain authority there in the Indus Valley civilization. So the most important criteria to call a culture a civilization is that civilization is a mature phase of culture. Civilization is a mature phase of culture, and most importantly, in a civilization, they develop even the art of writing. Now, Harappans, they knew about art of writing. However, we have not been able to decipher that. But they knew about art of writing, which was not there in the case of the Aryans of Vedic period. So Aryans were illiterate. As Amrashi was right in saying that the Vedic literature was written later on, in fact. It was not written in the time of the Vedic phase or Vedic period. The so-called Rig Veda or Yajurveda, Samveda, Atharvaveda that we know were never penned down at that particular point of time. It was penned down in the Gupta and post-Gupta time. Fine. So that what actually was the issue. Now, since you have understood the meaning of civilization, let us just try to understand this question once again. Now, this question is asking you that ancient civilization in Indian subcontinent, it is directly referring you to understand about the IVC culture or IVC civilization, in fact. So from IVC only you have to trace it. So the traits of IVC culture, it continued from the era of Harappan civilization to the subsequent culture and civilization even till today. So as Amritansu had rightly identified that yes, in many parts of India, many of the traits of Harappa are still being continued. All right, the best example I can quote before all of you is tandoori roti. The tandoori roti we all do eat very comfortably, but we perhaps may not be knowing that who was the first person who was the first society who prepared tandoori roti. It was Harappans, but it has transmitted to us very comfortably. All right, now the point is why. Let us just try to understand this why. I'm giving you the next logic of why. So see on your screen why I'm telling you why. Just try to say here, the idea is now this was the part that was completely manned by the Harappans. All right, so this entire part was actually under the command of Harappans, in fact. All right. And even they have the overseas territories as well of Harappans. It's not like only Harappans are limited to here. They are even ever having overseas territories also, but largely they were concentrated here in this particular zone. Fine. Now see, this is the Harappan phase that I'm talking about. I'm talking about their mature phase of Harappan. The mature phase of Harappan was between 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE. And let me tell you one more thing, that contemporary to this, there were various other civilizations also here. Like this was Mesopotamian civilization. Mesopotamia today is Iraq. The land between Euphrates and Tigris is called as Mesopotamia. The rivers Euphrates and Tigris is actually called as Mesopotamia. So today's Iraq was Mesopotamia 4,500, 600 years back from today. All right. So that was Mesopotamia. Parallel to that, there was also Egyptian civilization also. Egyptian civilization, that is contemporary Egypt. Parallel to that, there was also a small civilization like Sumerian civilization also. Sumerian. Parallel to that, there was also Greek civilizations as well. Now see, they were all smaller civilization. In context to the Harappa, the area were very much limited. That is one thing you have to remember always. Fine. In case of Harappa, Harappa was actually in command of this entire territory. But in the rest of India, was it completely vacant? So it was not like that. In the rest of India also there were smaller cultures. There were smaller cultures living parallel to even Harappa. These cultures are called as, very popularly in textbook of history, they are called as Chalcolithic culture. In case of even Kashmir, it was still Neolithic culture. All right. In case of the Madhya Pradesh area, there was a separate culture that is named as OCP culture. That is ochre colored pottery culture. It was contemporary to Harappa. The year of this culture was 2000 BC around. Fine. Now you see, I mean, this is not the only point. The point is here also there were multiple cultures. Let's say Jhukar culture, Amri culture, smaller cultures were there, which was slightly different for Harappa, but they were on the periphery of Harappan territory. And these cultures were completely based upon agriculture. Unlike Harappa, whose economy was based upon trade and commerce. And let me tell you, the Harappan culture is said to be, or Harappan civilization is said to be an urban culture. Now, and in urban area, the main profession of the people is not farming. The main profession of the people out there is always commerce, trade, business. Therefore, it is called as urban area. But the point that you have to always remember and acknowledge, from where these urban areas of Harappa used to get food grains and how they used to support their own population, from where this Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Chanhudaro, Banavali, Rakhigadi, Dholavira, Lothal, now they used to get the meal. कहाँ से आता था इनके पास खाने का? So they were surrounded by various village cultures, various, not one or two, various village cultures which was still based only upon agriculture as the main occupation of the people. And these people used to go to the urban areas of Harappa. All right. So Harappa happened to be a civilization which was still surrounded by multiple culture. India since then till today happened to be a country which is known as mosaic of cultures. And because of this mosaic of culture, there was a regular interaction between these cultures with each other. There were regular interaction between these cultures with each other because of trade of food grains, trade of any other items. All right. And when the Harappans declined, it was only civilization declined, not culture declined. Culture never declines. Culture never declines. It only changes with the passage of time. Then what declines? It is the civilization which declines. So when the Harappan civilization or the Harappa declined, their urban phase declined. Their urban characteristic of the mature Harappan phase declined. And they all went back. Of course, some of them perished because of some of the other reasons, but they all started migrating to other parts of India. They all started migrating to other parts of India, slowly and gradually. All right. So when they started migrating to other parts of India, they carried forward their culture to that part. Fine. And at the same time, the people from different phases also started coming in this particular area, happened to be, let's say, Aryans. So Aryans started coming into Indian territory, and there was a regular interaction between Aryans and Harappans also. So even that there has been cultural transmigration, cultural changes, exchanges took place between these two communities. So many of the culture of Harappa was adopted by the Aryans as well. Let's say we have found various instances of fire altars. Now the fire altars have been found in Kalibangan, Lothal, and even Chandrudaro. And fire altar became the very prominent religious symbol of the Aryans. Fine. God or Lord Pasupati. Now in Aryans, the same Lord Pasupati became Lord Shiva. That's the reason why we say it was Proto-Shiva that has been discovered in Harappan site. So see, I mean, this is how exchanges start taking place. So in case of India, there were various factors behind this possibility. First, India happened to be a big subcontinent. Second, India was having in Harappa a huge population. Third, within Harappan phase also, there was no dominance of one culture. Harappans never dominated with one set of culture in the entire areas, because culture of Kalibangan varies from the culture of even Harappa with some similarities. All right. Culture of Kalibangan site varies from the culture of Harappa, because in Kalibangan we have found the plowed field. So people of Kalibangan was not even living in urban areas, but also they were practicing agriculture. On the contrary, in Harappa, they were completely based upon trade and commerce. Mohenjo-daro, which happened to be the capital of Harappa, was completely based upon trade and commerce. Fine. So see, I mean, this is how even in the Harappan culture, Harappan civilization, there was no dominance of one culture over rest of the areas. So even Harappans are said to have been the people who used to respect the variety of culture with some set of uniformity, with some set of, you can say, having a similarity among them. So within Harappa also we have found culture variations. Outside Harappa also we have found cultural variations like OCP, Chalcolithic culture. So they were very primitive culture, in fact. Unlike Harappa, Harappa was advanced. Harappa knew the art of writing, but they were not. Chalcolithic people were not knowing art of writing, but Harappans were knowing about art of writing. So idea is, in the Indian subcontinent, right from the beginning, right from when you conceptualize the concept of India, or rather we start conceptualizing the concept of India, right from the first day, India happened to be a country of composite culture. This was not a case in the context of Mesopotamia, Egyptian, and the Greece civilizations. Now, the Greece civilization was overtaken completely by the Christianity. Mesopotamia and Egyptian civilizations were completely overtaken by Islam. And as Nishant was saying, he was right to a certain extent, that yes, Islam also came to India. But first and foremost, India was a very vast country, which was not possible for Islam to Islamize the entire territory of India. That was the first limitation with Islam. Second, India was a country right from the beginning having multiple cultures. And without seeking their support, it was not possible for Islam even to dominate over the Indian territory. So therefore, they started promoting the idea of composite culture also right from the beginning. So from one hand, they were trying to even proselytize the people. On the other hand, they were also trying to pacify the people in the name of culture. That's the reason why Sufism was promoted deliberately in India. If Sufism would not have been there would have been several classes of civilizations in India. It was Sufism which provided a common platform for both religions to survive together and coexist together. All right. So you see, I mean, my point was that in these areas, there was no any existence of multiple cultures. These areas, whether Egyptian, Mesopotamian, or even the Greece, there was the dominance of one culture right from the beginning. And even after, they were overtaken by one culture which dominated over the entire territory because of a couple of reasons. One was their territory was very limited. It was easy for any religion to overshadow any other culture. Unlike India, India was a big and vast subcontinent. So therefore, what do we see? We see that there was a breakdown in their cultural traditions, as Amritansu was right to point out that Egyptian pharaohs used to construct pyramid. Of course, that got stopped because it was overtaken by the Islamic culture. And in Islam, there was no concept of pyramid construction. Fine. On the contrary, in India, the civilizations did decline, but the culture continued without a breakdown from one to another civilizations. So even there happened to be a regular foreign invasions in India. Islam was not the first foreign invaders. In fact, India happened to be a land which have been invaded by various people. Even we all probably may have been invaders. So that's a fact. According to many anthropologists, we Indians normally the North Indians are mainly the invaders. We happen to be from Aryan race. It is only the tribals and probably South Indians who happen to be the original Harappans. That is one of the analysis of many of the anthropologists, in fact. All right, but let us not go into that particular debate of racial connotation of these all things. But this is what actually we have to take, understand in totality of Indian situation, in fact. So India happened to be a land of many cultures and civilizations to come over here and to take a permanent seat in this particular country. Let's say in post-modern period. Can you imagine in the post-modern period, the kind of foreign influx that was there? It was highest in terms of its variety of foreign invasions in India at that particular point of time. Indo-Greeks, Greek invasion happened, Indo-Greeks came, isn't it? Then even, let's say, the Pallavas came, or the Sakas came. So there were many people who kept on coming, even Kusanas kept on invading, coming to India, then finally made India as a permanent land, permanent residence. Even adopting their culture, that's a very important fact for all of you. For example, Antyalki Das, he was an ambassador of Heliodorus. Heliodorus was an Indo-Greek king. His center of power was in the region nearby Taxila. In Afghanistan, there was an Indo-Greek bastion was there. He sent his ambassador Heliodorus, Heliodorus was a king, sent ambassador Antyalki Das to Vidisha in Madhya Pradesh. Now you can understand the distance between the area of Taxila to Vidisha is more than 3,000 kilometers, in fact. He sent there for what purpose? For the purpose of erecting a Garud Dhawaj pillar in the honor of Heracles, which according to historians, he was God Krishna, Lord Krishna. So he became a follower of Lord Krishna. So see, this is the reason why people did come in India, people do come in India, but they start accepting the Indian culture very fondly. And precisely because of that only, India happened to be always a mosaic of culture, and till it remains a mosaic of culture, India is the only country in the world which remain on this earth till the earth exists. That's a fact. China may not remain after 1,000 years. That is also a fact. But India will always remain even after thousands of years. That is another fact that you have to keep in always consideration, because the Indian culture will never die out. All right. So what was there in before 4,500 years back in Harappa is still continued in today's lifetime, today's we can say lifespan or lifestyle. It's still being continued. Still we are discussing and talking about Harappa even after 4,500 years of the time span of time, isn't it? So even after 4,005 years from today, India will remain. That is a fact, and that is the strength of India to always have composite culture. So that was the demand of this question. ठीक है, अब समझ में आया कि क्यों ये क्वेश्चन पूछा गया था यूपीएससी के द्वारा, क्योंकि वो आपसे जानना चाह रहा था कि जैसा ट्रेंड चल रहा है कि एक कल्चर का पूरा कंट्री हो, ये सही नहीं है इंडिया के लिए. India should and must be known by having multiple cultures. So unity in diversity is the strength of this country, and we have to protect, we have to nurture, we have to cherish this composite culture of India. All right, that's the beauty of India. So this is what was the demand of this particular question. Fine. Is it clear to all of you now? Fine. So this is the first topic to make you understand the difference between culture, civilization, continuity, heritage altogether. Now we are entering the second chapter of art and culture, and that is the philosophy of Indian culture. So what was the philosophy of India? Let us understand that now. Now let me tell you, I have gone through many of these scripts also, and even some of the books also, to find out the answer of this particular question. But none of the book actually was able to explain this issue the way I have explained to all of you, in fact. And let me tell you, you can ask this question to anyone, even a professor of history from any university. He will also not be able to give you this particular explanation like this way. All right, but that is the core of this particular question, and the answer of this particular question, in fact. So hope now you have understood it clearly, and probably if any question like that will be asked to you, you will be able to do justice on that particular question. Okay. So now coming to the next issue, that is the Indian philosophies. Let us understand the philosophy or the evolution of philosophies in India. So we have to understand Indian philosophies and the evolution of Indian religion also. So first of all, we'll understand the second chapter for all of you, chapter number 2. First of all, we'll understand Indian philosophies, in fact, and then we'll enter to the religion aspect. See, IVC. Now here we have little information about the philosophy of the people of IVC. First and foremost, what do you mean by philosophy, in fact? Now, philosophy is basically your outlook towards your life. हिंदी में फिलोसफी को दर्शन शास्त्र भी कहते हैं, दर्शन शास्त्र. So what is your viewpoint towards your life? What is your outlook towards the life? What do you want from your life? What do you want to achieve in your life? And how you want to achieve those things in your life, that all become a part of one's philosophy, in fact. So philosophy in nutshell is the undercurrent spirit that keeps guiding you and motivating you towards your goal. All right. So it's an undercurrent spirit, undercurrent feelings that keep guiding you towards your goal in your life. That is the philosophy, basically. Now see, philosophy also changes with the time and also with the people out there, just like culture, in fact. So for example, IVC. Now the people of IVC, what kind of philosophy that was being professed by them, we do have very little information, only because that we have not been able to decipher their script. And since we have not been able to decipher the script, we do not know what kind of mental outlook that was carried by the people of the IVC era. On the basis of the archaeological evidences that we have been able to only understand that people of IVC was definitely, they were materialistic in their orientation. They were materialistic in their orientation, and probably religion didn't have much influence on their activity. Religion didn't have much influence, much impact or influence on their day-to-day activity. Now, on what basis do we say this? We say it on the basis of that we have not got any major artifact or any major, you can say, monument like temples in Harappa. We have got temples in Mesopotamia, but not in Harappa. We have only great bath that have been discovered or found in Mohenjo-daro. But the great bath, whether it was used for any religious purpose, like religious bathing purpose or any other purpose, we have no very clear-cut indication regarding that. Some scholars do opine that yes, it was used for ablution, that we say religious bathing, in fact, a culture which is still being continued in India. So bathing as a practice in our religion is still seen in India. You go to Haridwar, you go to Prayagraj, you go to Varanasi. For what purpose? For the purpose of religious bathing only. So this practice was there in Harappa, but whether it was used for religious, you can say, quest or religious outlook, we do not have a concrete evidence regarding that. The one thing was there, they were materialistic in terms of the kind of urban life that they were using. So they were having better life than the others. That's one thing. Secondly, despite they being materialistic, they didn't have a very high aesthetic look or aesthetic taste, in fact. So they lacked aestheticism. So they lacked aestheticism. That means that they didn't have the appreciation of, or rather the, you can say, the understanding of beauty or beautification of any item. Now we have found many of their artifacts, but unfortunately, they are not so well polished, well crafted, well painted, and painted to the extent of its high beautification. All right. All right. So fine. So they lacked aesthetic sense. Fine. And that we derive it from their, all those their artifacts. The whatever artifacts and their material that we have discovered, we have not found a very high sense of aesthetic sense that was applied by the artist or the craftsman while conceiving the concept of either the toys or the concept of the human being with the mother goddess or the bearded man, whatever artifact that we have got, in fact, that has not been so beautifully designed, in fact. But that what actually it is derived from the IBC's people's philosophy or out their life outlook, in fact. So that is one thing that was there. Then when we enter into the Vedic phase or Vedic era, so between this particular period, that is 1500 BCE to 600 BCE, this is the Vedic era, the early and later Vedic phase, both I'm taking up together. In this phase, what do we find? We find that there was an emergence of various schools of philosophy in India for the first time. Shad Darshan. For the first time, Shad Darshan got immersed in India at this particular point of time. Shad Darshan was the 6 schools of philosophy. They started believing in the concept of transmigration of soul. All right, they started believing in the concept of soul, transmigration of soul, etc. by the time of, let's say, later Vedic phase, because we get to know about it from Vriddhanak Upanishad. So from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we got to know about the transmigration of soul in the Vedic period. Fine. Then you see the emergence of the Dharma Shastras or the Dharma Sutras in the post-Vedic period, or towards the post-Vedic period. In fact, by 600 BCE, that got emerged. 600 BCE to 300 BCE, it is said to have emerged. And they also started guiding the human life in terms of providing them the code of conduct, the societal laws. All right, so code of conduct, the laws in the society. For example, let's say Manusmriti, very popular among anti-Brahminical sentiment people. Manusmriti. So Manusmriti was another textbook, a law book, an outcome of the Vedic era, which also used to give us the philosophical outlook of the people out there. So what kind of lifestyle they wanted to have. So this is what we get it from Dhamma Sutra, Dhamma Shastras also. Fine. Dhamma Sutras are basically commentaries upon Dhamma Shastras. That's the reason why they are both similar in that way. All right. So this is how you see the emergence of the various schools of philosophies. There are 6 schools of philosophies, like some of them, like let's say Sankhya school of philosophy, Nyaya school of philosophy, Yoga school of philosophy, Mimamsa school of philosophy, Vedanta school of philosophy. All right. So Sankhya, Mimamsa, Vaisesika. So see, these are the 6 schools of philosophy that got emerged in the Vedic era. Vedanta was the last one. Vedanta was last one. That's the reason why it is called as Vedanta, which is the end of the Veda. All right. So Vedantic philosophy was something which actually has been professed by many of the people even in contemporary era. For example, let's say the best example to understand is that Swami Vivekananda. The Swami Vivekananda was a Vedantic philosopher or follower of Vedantic philosophy. Fine. Similarly, let's say Dr. Radhakrishnan, he was also a follower of Vedantic philosophy. So Vedantic philosophy became quite popular in India out of this all, along with even yoga, which has been now becoming very popular. All right. So yoga is equally very popular now of Patanjali. So see, I mean, these all school of philosophies, they used to talk about one particular common thing, that is, what is the role of a soul in the universe? So what is the concept of universe? What is the role of a soul? How to develop a harmony between mind and soul and the body also. So mind, soul, and body, how to develop a harmony. These are the major, you can say, quest of these all schools of thought. Fine. So Vedanta school of thought, it also talked about the cultural harmony. Cultural harmony, and the man is the maker of their destiny. In other words, कर्म ही धर्म है. So work is worship. So this philosophy, we derive it from the Vedantic school of thought only. And exactly the same philosophy was propagated by Swami Vivekananda. Fine. So see, I mean, this is how the schools of thought of Vedic era became a part of the philosophy of Indian lifestyle. But the most important contribution we should not miss out happened to be also by our mythologies, especially Ramayana and Mahabharata. So the era of Ramayana and Mahabharata happened to be the another very big contribution towards the rise of the school of philosophies in India, especially Bhagavad Gita. Now, Bhagavad Gita, you can't miss out when you talk about philosophy of India. Because it was the Bhagavad Gita which is the first text, the first we can say uh, the epic which talk about the importance of your duties. All right, your duties. So your duties come first, then your relatives, then your kinship, then your any other thing in your life. So that particular preaching, that particular philosophy of life has been taught by Bhagavad Gita. So this worship is also one of the very major philosophies of Bhagavad Gita. And this has become a part of our day-to-day life today. This is how we are being guided by this school of philosophies without even knowing about that from where these all philosophies have come into our life. That is how the source of philosophies happen to be there right from the ancient time. Then you see emergence of new school of philosophies. From 6th century BCE onwards, emergence of heterodox sects, and they provided some new schools of philosophies, especially I'm talking about here Buddhism and Jainism. So Buddhism and Jainism became the new schools of philosophies, along with even Ajivikism, even materialism. Now, these all were also equally promoted in the 6th century BC onwards in India. And it continued for a long period of time, in fact, in India. Then, in the 8th century CE or AD, we see another era of emergence of new school of philosophies in India in the form of the emergence of Bhakti movement. So Bhakti movement played a very instrumental role in giving a shape to India's new school of philosophies. So here you see emergence of new school of philosophies, such as Sankaracharya, Madhvacharya, Ramanujam. So these all actually emerged here, emergence of new school of philosophies here in India. All right. So we have to also talk about that.
So which person, what was the name after Shankaracharya?
Sankaracharya, Madhvacharya, Vallabhacharya, Charya, Ramanujam. See, I mean, these were the great leaders or great philosophers of India in the Bhakti movement era. It was one of the longest period you can see. From 8th century to 17th century, it continued. So more than 1,000 years, it continued in India, in fact. So in different phases, there were different scholars, different leaders, different philosophers who propagated their philosophies, but they all were central towards one common agenda. Therefore, they all are called as Bhakti saints. They all are called as Bhakti saints, and they all are part of the Bhakti movement only in India. Fine. And in between, also by 12th century CE, we see emergence of Sufism also in India, another stream of philosophy in India. So Sufism again remained a dominant philosophy in India till 18th century, till the era of first half of Aurangzeb, in fact. So till 18th century, it remained a dominant form of philosophy to guide the Indian population, Indian state altogether. Fine. And then after that, from 18th century onwards till 20th century, in this period, there was various philosophies that was again guiding us, especially the socio-religious reform movement of India. Socio-religious reform movement of India, led by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Swami Vivekanand, Swami Dayanand, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, all right, etc. So they all were the part of social reform movement, and this particular movement was equally influenced by the philosophy like utilitarianism. That was the philosophy which was guiding the socialist reform movement also in India at the point of time. So utilitarianism was one philosophy, and then modernization of India was another philosophy that played a role in India's social religious reform movement. So see, this is the complete chain of events for all of you. So in nutshell, right from ancient to modern times, these are the philosophical evolutions in India at different phases of time. Fine. So today we'll keep it till here only, because it will become overloaded today. Tomorrow we'll start with the aspect of Buddhism, Jainism, because from there only we have to trace the entire story. All right, and that is how we have to take up the entire philosophical aspect, and then we'll also have to take up religious aspect tomorrow itself. Fine. So tomorrow we'll complete the story altogether. Fine. If Nikhil sir takes class, then all right, then I'll take on Friday. If he does not, then I'll take tomorrow also. Fine. So that will be the plan. If you have any question, you can ask. Then we can conclude today's session.
Sir, while I was going through the fine arts NCERT, तो उसमें I had a doubt कि do we have to learn the name of each king कि किसने कौन सा temple construct करवाया and किसमें like who commissioned all artworks and all?
See, few of the names are really important. Let's say, for example, you are studying about Mount Abu temple. All right. So obviously the names of those people are really important. Let's talk about, let's say, temples of South India, Brihadeshwara temple. So the names of the rulers or the person who was involved in the construction, if it is given there in the NCERT, then obviously UPSC can ask you a question in prelims.
Okay, sir.
So those names are important. So you have to remember those names. So you can make a list or chart and keep, let's say, paste upon your side table, so that you can keep looking at those charts regularly. Okay, so that you should not put any extra effort to remember those names.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other question?
सर मीराबाई भी लिख सकते हैं ना भक्ति मूवमेंट में?
हाँ हाँ, अभी तो बहुत, इसलिए तो मैंने बताया कि बहुत लंबा फेज है इसमें। तो मीराबाई क्या है इसमें, यू हैव टू राइट आल्सो अबाउट लेट्स से द गुरु नानक देव. So complete new religion emerged out of this bhakti movement.
लिंगायतिज्म को कंसीडर कर सकते हैं क्या फिलॉसफी?
हाँ, लिंगायत्स also we talk about लिंगायत्स there in the class of religion. ठीक है. So religion में हम उसको ज्यादा कंसीडर करते हैं, philosophy as such बहुत ज्यादा था नहीं उसका. ठीक है. So there are many examples in fact. So we'll talk about that also. ठीक है. Any other question you have? All right, so let's then conclude today's class. All right, so again I'll see you tomorrow. ठीक है. ठीक है, चलिए फिर. Bye bye. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.